There's a quiet kind of power that most people never find. It doesn't announce itself with confidence. It doesn't parade through life untouched by pain. It simply endures. And it does so without hardening into stone. This is mental resilience. But somewhere in our modern understanding, we confused resilience with toughness. We started believing that to survive, we must become unbreakable. That to thrive, we must stop feeling. That to be strong, we must build walls so high that nothing can reach us. This is the great lie. True resilience is not about becoming immune to pain. It's about learning how to hold pain without letting it hold you. It's the ability to feel everything deeply while still moving forward. To cry and still choose hope. To break and still rebuild. Most people live at one extreme or the other. They either feel too much and collapse under the weight, or they feel nothing and wonder why life tastes like ash. Both are prisons. One drowns in emotion, the other suffocates in numbness. Real resilience lives in the middle, in that sacred space where strength meets softness, where courage meets compassion, where you can be wounded and still remain whole. Think about the last time life knocked you down. Maybe it was a betrayal. Maybe it was failure. Maybe it was loss so profound you didn't think you'd survive it. In that moment, what did you do? Did you shut down, telling yourself that feeling less would hurt less? Or did you let the flood consume you, replaying the pain until it became your identity? Neither path leads to healing. Shutting down creates distance from life itself. You stop trusting people. You stop taking risks. You build a fortress around your heart and call it protection, when really it's just isolation. You survive, yes, but you don't live. On the other side, drowning in emotion keeps you stuck in the wound. You wear your pain like a badge. You tell the story over and over, finding new ways to hurt yourself with the same old narrative. You become so attached to suffering that healing starts to feel like betrayal. Mental resilience offers a third way. It teaches you to feel fully without falling completely, to acknowledge pain without becoming it, to honor your sensitivity while cultivating strength. Because sensitivity is not weakness, it's awareness. And awareness, when paired with resilience, becomes your greatest asset. In this audiobook, you will learn the neuroscience behind resilience, how your brain responds to adversity, and how you can rewire it for strength. You'll discover the hidden cost of emotional suppression and why numbing pain always backfires. You'll explore the difference between healthy vulnerability and self-destructive openness. We'll examine why some people bounce back from tragedy while others stay broken, and what separates those who grow through pain from those who just go through it. You'll learn practical strategies like the resilience reset method, cognitive flexibility training, and emotional granularity practice. We'll talk about the biology of stress, the psychology of hope, and the philosophy of suffering. And most importantly, you'll learn how to build a life where you can be both tender and tough, both open and protected, both sensitive and strong. By the end of this journey, you won't be harder. You'll be wiser. You won't feel less. You'll feel more clearly. You won't avoid pain. You'll know how to transform it. This is the science of mental resilience without losing your sensitivity. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Resilience Paradox. We're told from childhood that strength means not crying, that courage means not showing fear, that resilience means bouncing back quickly, smiling through the pain, moving on without looking back. But this understanding of resilience is incomplete. It's shallow. And it creates people who are hard on the outside, but hollow on the inside. The resilience paradox is this: the more you try to avoid pain, the more fragile you become. The more you suppress emotion, the more it controls you. The more you pretend to be unbreakable, the easier you shatter. True resilience is not built by avoiding difficulty. It's built by moving through it consciously, by feeling the full weight of what happens to you, and choosing, despite that weight, to keep going. Think of a tree in a storm. The tree that survives is not the one that refuses to bend. It's the one flexible enough to sway with the wind, to let the storm move through its branches without snapping. That's resilience, flexibility under pressure, not rigidity. Most people approach adversity with one of two strategies. They either resist it completely, building walls, denying feelings, pushing through with brute force, or they collapse under it, letting every setback confirm their worst beliefs about themselves and the world. Both responses come from the same place: a misunderstanding of what resilience actually is. Resilience is not the absence of breaking. It's the presence of healing. It's not about never falling. It's about knowing you can get back up. It's not about feeling nothing. It's about feeling everything and still choosing meaning over misery. Let's look at two people facing the same situation. Sarah and Michael both lose their jobs on the same day. Same company, same reason, same financial uncertainty ahead. Sarah tells herself she's strong. She doesn't cry. She doesn't talk about it. She updates her resume and starts applying immediately, keeping busy so she doesn't have to feel. On the surface, she looks resilient. But inside, anxiety is building. She's not processing the loss. She's running from it. Michael, on the other hand, lets himself feel it. He's angry. He's scared. He talks to friends. He cries one night, grieving not just the job, but the identity he attached to it. Then slowly, he begins to explore what this change might open up. He starts applying too, but with curiosity rather than desperation. 6 months later, Sarah is burned out. She took the first job that came along because she couldn't sit with uncertainty. She's employed, but she's exhausted and still carrying unprocessed fear. Michael took longer to find work, but when he did, he chose something aligned with his values. He feels stronger because he didn't avoid the pain. He moved through it. That's the paradox. The person who seems weaker in the moment, who allows themselves to feel, often becomes stronger in the long run. Because resilience is not about speed. It's about depth. When you allow yourself to break down, you give yourself the chance to break through. The problem is, our culture worships speed. We want instant recovery. We celebrate people who are back on their feet the next day. We admire those who never seem affected. But what we don't see is the cost. The sleepless nights, the numbed emotions, the relationships that suffer because someone can't access their own heart anymore. Suppression always has a price. You can delay feeling, but you can't delete it. The emotion doesn't disappear. It just goes underground, into your body, your behavior, your subconscious. It shows up as tension, as illness, as sudden outbursts over small things, as a vague sense of emptiness you can't explain. Resilience without sensitivity is just survival mode. And you can't live a full life in survival mode. You need access to your emotions to make good decisions, to connect with others, to know what you actually want. When you cut yourself off from pain, you also cut yourself off from joy, from love, from meaning. Here's what real resilience looks like. It's the mother who loses a child and still finds reasons to smile years later, not because she's forgotten, but because she's integrated the loss into a larger story of love. It's the entrepreneur who fails 3 times and starts again, not because failure doesn't hurt, but because the vision matters more than the pain. It's the person who gets their heart broken and still believes in love, not because they're naive, but because they understand that closing off is a greater loss than risking hurt again. Resilience is not the absence of vulnerability. It's vulnerability that doesn't destroy you. It's staying open even when life gives you reasons to close. It's feeling deeply without drowning. It's being tender without being fragile. The paradox resolves when you understand this. Strength is not built by avoiding weakness. It's built by acknowledging it, by being honest about what hurts, what scares you, what breaks you, and then choosing, consciously and deliberately, to continue anyway. You don't become resilient by pretending you're fine. You become resilient by admitting when you're not and doing the work anyway. Chapter 2. How your brain builds strength. Resilience is not a personality trait you either have or don't have. It's a skill, a learnable, trainable, biological process that happens in your brain. And understanding how it works changes everything, because once you see the mechanics, you realize you have more control than you thought. Let's start with what happens in your brain when something difficult occurs. The moment you face a threat, real or perceived, your amygdala, the brain's alarm system, fires. It sends distress signals throughout your body. Your heart rate increases. Stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline flood your system. Your body prepares to fight, flee, or freeze. This is your survival response. It's ancient, automatic, and incredibly powerful. But here's what matters for resilience. What happens next depends entirely on which part of your brain takes over. If your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for logic, planning, and emotional regulation, can come online, you start to assess the situation rationally. You ask questions. How bad is this really? What can I control? What's my next step? This is where resilience lives, in the gap between reaction and response. But if your amygdala stays in control, you remain in threat mode. Everything feels like an emergency. Small problems feel catastrophic. You can't think clearly. You can't plan. You just react. And reactive people are not resilient people. They're exhausted people. So the first key to building mental resilience is strengthening the connection between your amygdala and your prefrontal cortex. This connection is called top-down regulation. It's your higher brain calming your emotional brain. And it gets stronger every time you pause during stress, every time you take a breath instead of reacting, every time you choose perspective over panic. There's a second brain structure that matters enormously for resilience, the hippocampus. This is where memories are processed and stored. When you go through something traumatic, your hippocampus helps determine whether that event becomes a scar or a story. If the memory is processed healthily, integrated into your life narrative with context and meaning, it becomes a story. You can talk about it without reliving it. You've learned from it. It's part of your past, not your present. But if the memory is not processed, if it's suppressed or avoided, it remains fragmented. It doesn't feel like the past. It feels like now. This is why unprocessed trauma keeps replaying. Your brain hasn't marked it as over. Resilient people have strong hippocampal function. They process experiences. They make meaning from pain. They don't just endure. They integrate. Now let's talk about neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself. For most of human history, we believed the brain was fixed. You were born with certain traits, and that was that. But neuroscience has shattered that belief. Your brain changes constantly based on what you practice. Every thought you think, every action you take, every emotion you regulate or don't, you're either strengthening resilience pathways or reinforcing fragility. When you face difficulty and respond with awareness, with intentional calm, with problem solving, instead of panicking, you're literally building resilience at the neural level. You're teaching your brain, this is not a catastrophe. This is a challenge, and I can handle challenges. Over time, your baseline stress response lowers. Your window of tolerance, the range of emotional intensity you can handle without falling apart, expands. Things that once overwhelmed you start to feel manageable. That's not because life got easier. It's because your brain got stronger. There's also something called stress inoculation. Just like a vaccine exposes you to a small amount of illness to build immunity, controlled exposure to stress builds mental resilience. This is why people who've never faced adversity often crumble at the first sign of difficulty. They have no reference point. Their brains haven't learned that discomfort is survivable. But people who face challenges and overcome them develop confidence. Not arrogance, confidence. A quiet knowing that says, I've been through hard things before. I can do it again. This is why avoiding all stress, all discomfort, all challenge makes you weaker, not stronger. Your brain needs resistance to build resilience, just like muscles need weight to grow. But and this is critical, the stress must be manageable. Overwhelming, chronic stress does the opposite. It shrinks the hippocampus. It keeps the amygdala hyperactive. It floods your system with cortisol until your body can't regulate anymore. This is trauma. And trauma doesn't build resilience. It breaks it. So the goal is not to seek suffering. It's to approach difficulty with the right mindset and the right support. To challenge yourself without destroying yourself. To push your edges without shattering them. Another critical factor is something neuroscientists call cognitive flexibility. This is your brain's ability to shift perspective, to see situations from multiple angles, to adapt when things don't go as planned. Rigid thinking is the enemy of resilience. If you can only see one way forward and that way gets blocked, you're stuck. But flexible thinking allows you to pivot, to find new paths, to reframe failure as feedback. People with high cognitive flexibility don't just survive change. They navigate it creatively. They ask better questions. Instead of, why is this happening to me? They ask, what is this teaching me? Instead of, this shouldn't be happening, they ask, since this is happening, what now? That shift in language reflects a shift in neural processing. And it makes all the difference. Finally, let's talk about the default mode network, the part of your brain that's active when you're not focused on a task. This is where you daydream, reminisce, and unfortunately, ruminate. When your default mode network is stuck replaying negative experiences, predicting worst-case scenarios, and reinforcing limiting beliefs, resilience becomes impossible. But you can train this network through mindfulness, through meditation, through intentional thought management. You can teach your brain to default to curiosity instead of catastrophe, to hope instead of helplessness. The science is clear. Resilience is not about being born strong. It's about training your brain to respond to difficulty with awareness, flexibility, and intentionality. Your biology is not your destiny. Your practice is. Every time you pause before reacting, you're building resilience. Every time you reframe a setback, you're building resilience. Every time you choose meaning over misery, you're building resilience. Neuron by neuron, thought by thought, choice by choice. You are becoming stronger, not harder. Stronger. Chapter 3. The Sensitivity Advantage. Sensitivity has been misunderstood for generations. We treat it like a flaw, something to overcome, a disadvantage in a world that values toughness. But this couldn't be further from the truth. Sensitivity, when understood and managed well, is one of the most powerful tools for building lasting resilience. Let's start by defining what sensitivity actually is. Sensitive people process information more deeply. They notice subtleties others miss. They feel emotions more intensely, both their own and others. They're affected more by their environment, by beauty, by suffering, by change. This is not weakness. This is heightened perception. Think of sensitivity as having a more advanced operating system. You're receiving more data, processing more complexity, experiencing more depth. The challenge is not the sensitivity itself. It's learning how to manage the volume of input without becoming overwhelmed. Most sensitive people spend their lives wishing they were different. They look at people who seem unbothered and think that's strength. They try to toughen up, to feel less, to care less, and it never works. You can't change your nervous system's fundamental wiring, but you can learn to work with it instead of against it. Here's the truth. Sensitive people often become the most resilient, not despite their sensitivity, but because of it. Because they feel pain deeply, they develop sophisticated emotional processing skills. Because they notice when something's wrong, they address problems early. Because they're affected by their environment, they become intentional about creating healthy spaces. Sensitivity gives you early warning systems that less sensitive people don't have. You sense when a relationship is off before it explodes. You notice when your body needs rest before you collapse. You feel the subtle shifts in your mental health before they become crises. This is an advantage if you learn to listen to it. The problem comes when sensitive people ignore these signals because they've been taught that feeling them is the problem. So they override their intuition. They push through exhaustion. They stay in situations that hurt them because they think enduring pain proves strength. But resilience is not about enduring unnecessary pain. It's about honoring your signals and responding wisely. Let's look at emotional granularity, the ability to identify and name specific emotions with precision. Research shows that sensitive people often have higher emotional granularity. They don't just feel bad. They can distinguish between disappointment, frustration, grief, anxiety, and loneliness. This specificity is power. When you know exactly what you're feeling, you can address it accurately. If you're anxious, you need grounding. If you're lonely, you need connection. If you're disappointed, you need to grieve an expectation. But if everything just registers as bad, you don't know what you need. You just know you're suffering. Sensitive people also tend to be more empathetic. They can read emotions in others, sense unspoken tension, and understand perspectives different from their own. This makes them exceptional friends, partners, and leaders when they don't let others' emotions overwhelm their own. The key is differentiation. You can feel with someone without taking on their pain. You can understand their struggle without making it yours. This is compassionate resilience, being moved by suffering without being destroyed by it. There's also a creative advantage. Many artists, writers, innovators, and visionaries are highly sensitive. Their depth of feeling translates into depth of expression. Their ability to notice what others overlook becomes their unique contribution to the world. But here's where sensitivity becomes a liability. When it's paired with poor boundaries, with negative self-talk, with chronic stress, with environments that drain rather than nourish. A sensitive nervous system in a toxic environment is like a finely tuned instrument in a hurricane. It can't function. It just gets damaged. So if you're sensitive, your resilience depends on two things. First, creating an environment that supports your nervous system. This means curating your social circle, managing your sensory input, protecting your energy, and building recovery time into your life. Second, developing internal regulation skills. This means learning to self-soothe, to reframe, to ground yourself when emotions spike, to distinguish between feeling something and being consumed by it. When sensitive people master these two things, they don't just survive. They thrive. They become wise. They build deep relationships. They create meaningful work. They lead with empathy and strength. Think of someone like Brené Brown, a researcher who built a career on vulnerability. Or Fred Rogers, whose gentleness changed millions of lives. Or Maya Angelou, whose sensitivity to pain and beauty made her one of the greatest writers of our time. These people didn't succeed despite their sensitivity. They succeeded because of it. Because they felt deeply and then used that feeling to create, to connect, to contribute. That's the sensitivity advantage. When resilience and sensitivity work together, you get something rare. A person who can hold space for pain without being destroyed by it, who can feel joy without fearing its loss, who can love deeply without losing themselves. You don't need to become less sensitive to become more resilient. You need to become more skilled at working with your sensitivity, to see it not as a burden, but as a gift that requires stewardship. Because the world doesn't need more people who feel nothing. It needs more people who feel everything and still choose hope, still choose kindness, still choose to keep going. That's what sensitive resilience looks like. And it's more powerful than any armor. Chapter 4. The biology of breaking points. Everyone has a limit, a point where the pressure becomes too much, where the weight exceeds capacity, where the system says no more. This is not failure. This is biology. Understanding your breaking point is not about avoiding it. It's about recognizing it, respecting it, and learning how to expand your capacity over time. Your nervous system operates within what's called a window of tolerance. Inside this window, you can process information, regulate emotions, and respond to stress effectively. You're present, functional, capable. But when stress exceeds your window, you move into one of two zones. Hyperarousal, where you're flooded with panic, anger, racing thoughts, and overwhelming emotion. Or hypoarousal, where you shut down completely, feeling numb, disconnected, frozen, unable to act. Most people have experienced both. Think of a time when you exploded over something small. That was hyperarousal. Your system was already at capacity, and one more thing tipped you over. Or think of a time when you just couldn't function, when you stared at the wall, unable to move. That was hypoarousal. your system overloaded and shut down to protect itself. Neither state is sustainable, and neither feels good. But they're not moral failures. They're nervous system responses. The size of your window of tolerance is determined by several factors. Genetics play a role. Some people are born with more reactive nervous systems. Childhood experiences matter enormously. If you grew up in a safe, predictable environment, your window is likely wider. If you grew up in chaos, trauma, or chronic stress, your window is narrower. Current life circumstances affect it too. Good sleep, stable relationships, financial security, and physical health expand your window. Chronic stress, isolation, poor health, and instability shrink it. Here's what matters. Your window is not fixed. It can change. And the work of building resilience is largely the work of widening your window so you can handle more before you break. So how do you expand your window of tolerance? First, through nervous system regulation. This means practices that calm your body, deep breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, cold exposure, meditation, yoga, time in nature. These aren't luxuries, they're maintenance. Second, through co-regulation. This is when another person's calm, nervous system helps regulate yours. Think of a crying child who calms when held by a parent. That's co-regulation. As adults, we still need this. Spending time with grounded, present people expands your capacity. Spending time with reactive, chaotic people shrinks it. Third, through meaning. When you have a reason to endure, when difficulty connects to something you value, your capacity increases. Viktor Frankl survived concentration camps by holding on to meaning. Purpose doesn't eliminate pain, but it provides context that makes pain bearable. Fourth, through titration. This is the practice of exposing yourself to small amounts of stress in controlled ways, building tolerance gradually. It's why therapy works. You revisit painful memories in a safe space, processing them bit by bit until they lose their charge. You can apply this principle to any fear. If social situations overwhelm you, start with 5-minute conversations. If uncertainty paralyzes you, practice small acts of improvisation. You're training your nervous system to expand its range. Now let's talk about what happens at the breaking point itself. When you cross the threshold into hyperarousal or hypoarousal, trying to think your way out doesn't work. Your prefrontal cortex is offline. Logic is inaccessible. This is why people say things they don't mean when flooded with emotion, or why they can't make decisions when shut down. The only thing that helps in these moments is returning to your body. Bilateral stimulation, tapping alternating sides of your body, helps integrate the hemispheres of your brain. Grounding techniques, naming 5 things you can see, 4 you can touch, 3 you can hear, brings you back to the present. Movement, even just shaking your hands or walking, discharges stuck energy. Cold water on your face activates the dive reflex, immediately calming your nervous system. These are not coping mechanisms. They're nervous system tools. And they work because they address the biological reality of what's happening. Once you're back inside your window, then you can process. Then you can think. Then you can make meaning. But not before. Another critical piece is recognizing your early warning signs. Breaking points don't come out of nowhere. Your body signals you long before. Maybe your jaw tightens. Maybe your sleep disrupts. Maybe you withdraw from people. Maybe you get irritable over small things. These are flags. If you ignore them, you will hit your limit. But if you notice them, you can intervene early. Rest, connect, simplify. Do what your system needs before it forces you to. This is self-compassion, not indulgence. Wisdom. Here's the hard truth. Some breaking points are unavoidable. Life will sometimes exceed your capacity no matter how skilled you are. Tragedy, trauma, overwhelming loss. These things break people. And that's okay. Breaking is not the opposite of resilience. Breaking is sometimes the path to it. Because when you break and then put yourself back together, you learn something no unbroken person knows. You learn you can survive the unsurvivable. You learn your capacity is greater than you thought. You learn that falling apart doesn't mean staying apart. This is post-traumatic growth. Not everyone who suffers trauma experiences it, but many do. They don't just return to baseline. They grow beyond it. They become more compassionate, more present, more grateful, more clear about what matters. Not because suffering is good. It's not. But because they use their breaking point as a breaking open. The biology of breaking points teaches us humility. You are not limitless. You are human. And humans need rest, need support, need gentleness. Resilience is not about never breaking. It's about knowing you will sometimes, preparing when you can, being kind to yourself when it happens, and trusting that breaking is not the end of your story. It's often the beginning of a deeper one. Chapter 5. The Reframe Protocol. Your mind is a meaning-making machine. Every experience, every interaction, every outcome, your brain automatically assigns it meaning. And that meaning determines everything. How you feel, how you respond, whether you grow or stay stuck. The problem is, most people don't choose their meanings consciously. They inherit them from past wounds, from cultural conditioning, from fear. And those inherited meanings keep them trapped in patterns that don't serve them. The Reframe Protocol is about taking back control of the meaning you assign to your experiences. It's about becoming the author of your story instead of its victim. Let's start with a fundamental truth. Nothing has inherent meaning. Events are neutral until you interpret them. Rain is not good or bad. It's just water falling from the sky. A farmer praying for crops sees it as blessing. Someone planning an outdoor wedding sees it as disaster. Same rain, different meaning, different emotional response. Your life works the same way. Rejection is not inherently devastating. It's devastating when you interpret it as proof you're unlovable. But it's liberating when you interpret it as redirection towards something better aligned. Failure is not inherently shameful. It's shameful when you see it as confirmation of inadequacy. But it's educational when you see it as data about what doesn't work. The event stays the same. The meaning changes. And the meaning changes everything. Most people resist this idea because they confuse facts with interpretations. They say, but it is bad. They fired me. They betrayed me. I failed. Yes, those things happen. But the meaning you give them, what it says about you, about your future, about your worth, that's interpretation. And interpretation is always a choice. The Reframe Protocol has 3 steps: awareness, exploration, and selection. Step 1, awareness. Notice the automatic meaning your mind assigned. When something difficult happens, pause and ask, what story am I telling myself about this? Write it down exactly as you think it. I'm not good enough. This always happens to me. Nothing ever works out. People can't be trusted. I'll never recover from this. These are not truths. These are interpretations. And seeing them as interpretations creates distance. You're no longer fused with the thought. You're observing it. Step 2, exploration. Generate alternative meanings. Force yourself to come up with at least 3 other ways to interpret the same situation. If you lost your job, you could see it as failure, but you could also see it as liberation from something that wasn't right, as opportunity to find better alignment, as proof that you're being redirected toward your actual purpose. If someone betrayed you, you could see it as evidence that people are untrustworthy. Or you could see it as information about that specific person's capacity, as painful clarity that saves you from deeper investment, as a reminder to trust your intuition, which probably warned you. None of these reframes deny the pain. The job loss still creates financial stress. The betrayal still hurts. But the meaning you assign determines whether the pain teaches you or breaks you. Step 3. Selection. Choose the meaning that serves your growth, not the meaning that feels most dramatic, not the one that confirms your wounds, the one that empowers you to move forward. Ask yourself, which interpretation helps me grow? Which one keeps me stuck? Which one expands possibility? Which one closes it? Then consciously adopt the empowering interpretation. This is not positive thinking. This is not denial. This is strategic meaning-making. You're not pretending the hard thing didn't happen. You're deciding what it means going forward. Let's apply this to a real scenario. David's partner of 5 years ends the relationship unexpectedly. The immediate meaning his mind assigns is, I'm not enough. If I were better, they would have stayed. This interpretation creates shame, hopelessness, and fear of future relationships. But when David uses the reframe protocol, he explores alternatives. Maybe they weren't capable of the depth I need. Maybe we weren't truly compatible, and this is painful honesty. Maybe I've been ignoring my own needs in this relationship. Maybe this ending creates space for something more aligned. These aren't excuses. They're alternative truths, each equally valid as the first interpretation. David chooses the reframe that most serves him. This relationship taught me what I need and what I won't compromise on anymore. This ending, as painful as it is an act of honesty that I can respect. Now I have space to find someone truly compatible. This meaning allows him to grieve without collapsing into unworthiness. He can feel sad about the loss without making it mean something permanent about his value. That's the power of reframing. Here's what makes this protocol scientific, not just motivational. Your brain doesn't distinguish between believed thought and objective truth. Whatever meaning you consistently rehearse becomes your experienced reality. Neuroscience calls this experience dependent neuroplasticity. The meanings you repeat most often literally rewire your neural pathways. If you consistently interpret setbacks as evidence of inadequacy, your brain strengthens that pathway. Over time, that becomes your automatic interpretation, your default story. But if you consistently reframe challenges as opportunities for growth, your brain strengthens that pathway instead. You start automatically looking for the lesson, the redirection, the hidden gift. This doesn't mean bad things stop happening. It means you get better at metabolizing them, at extracting wisdom from pain, at moving through difficulty without getting stuck in it. The reframe protocol also builds what psychologists call internal locus of control, the belief that you have agency over your life. People with external locus of control see themselves as victims of circumstance. Things happen to them. They're powerless. People with internal locus of control see themselves as active participants. Things happen, and they choose their response. They have power. Guess which group is more resilient? Research is overwhelming. Internal locus of control predicts better mental health, higher achievement, greater life satisfaction, and faster recovery from adversity. The reframe protocol develops this. Every time you consciously choose meaning, you reinforce the belief that you have agency. Not over what happens, but over what it means and what you do next. There's a warning here too. Reframing is not spiritual bypassing. It's not pretending everything happens for a reason when something is genuinely unjust or traumatic. Some things are just terrible. Abuse is not a lesson. Oppression is not character building. Tragedy is not always redeemable. The reframe protocol is for your internal experience, for how you carry what happened, not for justifying what happened. You can acknowledge that something should never have occurred and still choose how it shapes your future. You can hold perpetrators accountable while refusing to let their actions define your worth. You can grieve what was stolen from you while building something meaningful with what remains. That's the nuance. Reframing is about your power, not about excusing others. It's about your growth, not about glorifying pain. It's about moving forward, not about pretending the past didn't matter. Master this protocol, and you become psychologically flexible. Life can hit you with the unexpected, and you don't shatter. You bend. You process. You reframe. And you keep moving. Not because you're unaffected, but because you refuse to be defined by circumstances you didn't choose. You become the author. And that makes all the difference. Chapter 6. Building emotional capacity. Resilience is not about having fewer emotions. It's about having the capacity to hold them without being overwhelmed. Think of emotional capacity like the volume of a container. Some people have small containers. A little bit of stress, and they overflow. A minor disappointment, and they collapse. Others have large containers. They can hold immense pressure, profound grief, intense fear, and still function. The goal is not to need a bigger container because life is easy. The goal is to build one because life is hard. And the bigger your emotional capacity, the more life you can hold without breaking. Emotional capacity is built through 3 primary mechanisms: exposure, processing, and integration. Let's break each one down. Exposure means deliberately allowing yourself to feel difficult emotions in small, manageable doses. This is the opposite of avoidance. Most people spend enormous energy trying not to feel. They distract, they numb, they stay busy, they scroll endlessly. Anything to avoid sitting with discomfort. But avoidance is expensive. It takes constant effort. And it shrinks your capacity because the emotions you avoid become more frightening over time. They grow in the dark. Exposure works differently. You turn toward the emotion. You sit with it. You feel it fully, but in a bounded way. Maybe you set a timer for 10 minutes and let yourself feel sadness completely. No distraction, no fixing, just feeling. At first, this feels unbearable. Your whole system wants to run. But if you stay, something remarkable happens. The emotion peaks, and then it begins to soften. It doesn't last forever. It moves through you. And each time you do this, your nervous system learns. Difficult feelings are not dangerous. I can survive them. They pass. This is exposure therapy applied to everyday emotional life. And it works because your brain updates its threat assessment. Emotions that once seemed overwhelming become manageable. Processing is the second mechanism. Feeling something is not the same as processing it. Processing means making sense of the emotion, understanding where it came from, what it's telling you, what you need. This is where journaling, therapy, and reflective conversation become powerful. You externalize the experience. You put words to what felt wordless. And in doing so, you move it from your amygdala, where it's just raw sensation, to your prefrontal cortex, where it becomes narrative. Narrative gives you control. A story has a beginning, middle, and end. It has context. It makes sense. Even if the sense is, this was senseless, at least you've contained it. Unprocessed emotions stay fragmented. They ambush you. They trigger you unpredictably. But processed emotions integrate into your life story. They're part of your past, not your present. Integration is the third mechanism. This is where you take what you've learned from the emotion and allow it to change you, not by making you harder, but by making you wiser. Integration asks, how does this experience inform how I move forward? What boundaries do I need now? What matters more than I realized? What matters less? People who integrate grow from pain. People who don't just carry it. Here's a practical example. Maya's father dies suddenly. The grief is immense. She has two choices. She can avoid it, staying busy, refusing to talk about it, pushing the sadness down whenever it rises. Or she can expose herself to it, allowing herself to cry, to miss him, to feel the full weight of loss. She can process it through conversations with friends, through therapy, through writing letters to him she'll never send. And she can integrate it by letting the loss clarify what matters, by becoming more present with people she loves, by carrying his values forward in how she lives. The grief doesn't disappear, but it becomes part of her, not something she's running from. That's what expanded capacity looks like. Now let's talk about the specific skills that build capacity. Emotional granularity is one. Most people experience emotion in broad categories: good, bad, stressed, fine. But resilient people can identify specific emotions with precision. Not just sad, but melancholic, disappointed, grieving, or lonely. Not just anxious, but apprehensive, worried, overwhelmed, or restless. Why does this matter? Because specific identification leads to specific intervention. If you're anxious, you need grounding. If you're lonely, you need connection. If you're disappointed, you need to grieve an expectation. But if everything is just stress, you don't know what to do. You just know you're suffering. Building emotional granularity is simple, but requires practice. Throughout your day, pause and name what you're feeling with as much specificity as possible. Use an emotion wheel if helpful. The more precise your vocabulary, the better your brain can regulate. Another skill is distress tolerance. This is your ability to sit with discomfort without immediately trying to fix it or escape it. Low distress tolerance makes people impulsive. They can't sit with craving, so they relapse. They can't sit with conflict, so they explode or shut down. They can't sit with uncertainty, so they make bad decisions just to resolve the tension. High distress tolerance gives you time. Time to think. Time to choose. Time to let the emotional intensity pass before you act. You build this through deliberate practice. Cold showers are one method. The discomfort is intense but controllable. You practice staying present through it. Your mind will scream to get out. But if you breathe and stay, you prove to yourself that discomfort is not danger. Meditation builds this too. Sitting still when your mind wants to move. Watching thoughts without following them. Feeling restlessness without reacting to it. Another technique is urge surfing. When you feel a strong impulse, don't act on it immediately. Instead, visualize it as a wave. It rises, peaks, and falls. If you can ride it without acting, the urge will pass. And each time you do this, you increase your capacity. A third skill is self-soothing. This is your ability to comfort yourself without external validation or distraction. Children who learn to self-soothe develop secure attachment. Adults who can do it develop emotional independence. They don't need someone else to fix their feelings. Self-soothing can be physical. A hand on your heart, deep breathing, progressive muscle relaxation. It can be cognitive, compassionate self-talk, reminding yourself of past resilience, reframing the situation. It can be sensory, soft music, a warm bath, the smell of something comforting. The method doesn't matter as much as the practice. You're teaching yourself, I can take care of my own nervous system. I don't need to be rescued. That's emotional capacity, the ability to hold your own feelings without outsourcing them. Here's the truth most people don't want to hear. Building emotional capacity is uncomfortable. It requires you to stop running from feelings you've spent years avoiding. It requires you to sit with pain instead of numbing it. It requires patience when you want instant relief. But the discomfort is temporary. The capacity lasts. And once built, it changes everything. You stop fearing your own emotions. You stop needing others to manage your feelings. You stop making decisions from a place of desperation. You become steady, not because you feel less, but because you can hold more. Chapter 7. The Recovery Architecture. Resilience is not built in the moment of crisis. It's built in the moments between crises. In how you rest, how you restore, how you refill the well that adversity drains. This is recovery architecture, the deliberate design of your life to support nervous system regulation, emotional processing, and energy renewal. Most people think of recovery as something that happens after you break. But that's too late. Strategic recovery is preventative. It's the maintenance that keeps you from breaking in the first place. Think of it like this. Your nervous system has a capacity for stress. Every challenge, every decision, every emotion draws from that capacity. If you never replenish it, you're operating on deficit. And deficit makes everything harder. Small problems feel catastrophic. Simple decisions feel overwhelming. Minor irritations feel unbearable. But when you're well-resourced, when your nervous system is regulated and your emotional reserves are full, you can handle what comes with clarity and calm. The same challenge that would have broken you at empty meets a different you at full. Recovery architecture has 4 pillars: physical restoration, emotional processing, cognitive rest, and relational nourishment. Let's explore each. Physical restoration is the foundation. Your brain and emotions are not separate from your body. They depend on it. And when your body is depleted, resilience becomes impossible. Sleep is the most critical component. 7 to 9 hours is not optional. It's when your brain consolidates memories, processes emotions, clears metabolic waste, and resets stress hormones. Chronic sleep deprivation shrinks your hippocampus, keeps your amygdala hyperactive, and impairs your prefrontal cortex. Translation: you're more emotional, less rational, and unable to regulate effectively. Nutrition matters too. Your brain uses 20% of your energy despite being only 2% of your body weight. It needs consistent glucose, healthy fats for neural structure, amino acids for neurotransmitter production. When you're running on sugar crashes and caffeine, your mood becomes a roller coaster. Movement is restoration, not just exertion. Exercise reduces cortisol, increases endorphins, improves sleep, and enhances neuroplasticity. Even 20 minutes of walking daily makes measurable difference in stress resilience. But rest is also movement. Stretching, gentle yoga, simple mobility work. Your body stores stress in tissue. Movement releases it. Emotional processing is the second pillar. You cannot build resilience on top of unprocessed pain. It has to move through you. This requires creating space for emotions, not just when they overflow, but regularly, intentionally. Some people journal. Others talk to trusted friends. Some see therapists. Some create art. The method matters less than the consistency. You need a way to externalize what's inside, to give it form, to see it outside yourself. One practice that's particularly powerful is the weekly emotional audit. Set aside 30 minutes every week to review. What did I feel this week? What triggered those feelings? What patterns am I noticing? What do I need to address? This prevents emotional backlog. Small feelings processed weekly don't become overwhelming. Feelings processed, never. Cognitive rest is the third pillar. Your mind needs breaks from decision-making, from problem-solving, from constant input. We live in a state of continuous partial attention. Email, messages, news, social media, endless demands on cognitive resources. This creates decision fatigue, reduces impulse control, and depletes willpower. Cognitive rest means periods of true disengagement, no screens, no problem solving, no productivity, just being. This can look like meditation, but it doesn't have to. Walking without your phone, sitting in nature, listening to music without doing anything else. The point is to let your default mode network reset, to stop consuming and start integrating. Many people resist this because they equate busyness with value. But cognitive rest is not laziness. It's the space where creativity emerges, where insight happens, where your brain makes connections it can't make while constantly processing new input. Finally, relational nourishment. Humans are social creatures. Our nervous systems regulate through connection. Isolation, even if you're an introvert, degrades resilience. You need people who see you, who understand you, who remind you of your worth when you forget. But not all connection is nourishing. Some relationships drain more than they give. Recovery architecture means being intentional about who you spend time with. Seek out people who are regulated themselves, who can listen without fixing, who can be present without judgment, who can hold space for your humanity. These relationships are not transactional. You're not looking for someone to solve your problems. You're looking for co-regulation, for the nervous system calming that happens when you're with someone safe. Even brief interactions matter. A genuine conversation. A hug that lasts longer than politeness. Eye contact that says, "I see you." These moments are not optional extras. They're biological necessities. Now let's talk about implementation. Recovery architecture fails when it's all or nothing. You don't need a perfect routine. You need sustainable practices. Start with one anchor in each pillar. Physical. Commit to a consistent sleep schedule. Emotional. 5 minutes of daily journaling. Cognitive. 1 screen-free hour before bed. Relational. 1 meaningful conversation per week. These are minimum viable doses. They're enough to create benefit without requiring perfection. As they become habit, you can expand, but consistency beats intensity every time. Here's what most people get wrong. They wait until they're in crisis to prioritize recovery. They burn out, then rest frantically, then burn out again. This is reactive recovery. It's better than nothing, but it's exhausting. Proactive recovery is different. It's the recognition that rest is not earned by exhaustion. Rest is what prevents exhaustion. You don't have to justify it. You don't have to wait until you've done enough. Recovery is not the reward for productivity. It's the foundation of it. When you build recovery into your normal life, crisis becomes survivable because you're not starting from empty. You have reserves. You have capacity. You have a regulated nervous system that can handle what comes. This is the architecture that holds you, not walls that block out life, scaffolding that supports you through it. Chapter 8. The Practice of Cognitive Flexibility. Your mind can be your greatest asset or your greatest prison. The difference is not intelligence, it's flexibility. Cognitive flexibility is the ability to shift perspective, to adapt when circumstances change, to hold multiple truths simultaneously without collapsing into confusion. It's what separates people who grow through difficulty from people who stay stuck in it. Rigid thinking is the enemy of resilience. When you can only see one way forward and that path closes, you're trapped. When you believe things should be a certain way and they're not, you suffer. When you hold one interpretation as absolute truth, you miss the complexity of reality. Flexible thinking opens doors. It allows you to pivot when plans fail, to find new meaning when old meaning crumbles, to see possibility where rigid minds see only dead ends. Let's start with a fundamental cognitive trap: all or nothing thinking. This is when everything becomes binary. Success or failure, good or bad, always or never, love me or hate me. This way of thinking creates fragility because life rarely fits into neat categories. Most experiences live in the gray area between extremes. When you think in absolutes, any deviation from perfect feels like catastrophe. You make one mistake and decide you're a complete failure. One relationship ends, and you conclude you're unlovable. One plan doesn't work, and you believe nothing ever will. This thinking pattern keeps you stuck because it doesn't allow for learning, for adjustment, for the messy reality of growth. Flexible thinking recognizes nuance. You can fail at something and still be capable. You can make a mistake and still be worthy. You can struggle and still be making progress. It's not all or nothing. It's both and. Another trap is fixed timeline thinking. You believe things should happen by a certain age, in a certain order, within a certain time frame. And when life doesn't comply, you interpret delay as failure. But resilient people understand that timing is not linear. Growth doesn't follow a schedule. Some things take longer than expected and turn out better for it. Some detours become the main path. Some delays are protection from things you couldn't see yet. Flexible thinking asks, what if this timeline is better than my timeline? What if the delay is the way? This doesn't mean passive acceptance of everything. It means staying open to possibility instead of rigid in expectation. Catastrophizing is another rigidity. This is when your mind jumps immediately to worst-case scenarios. Something goes wrong, and you extrapolate it into total disaster. You lose your job and immediately imagine homelessness. You have a conflict with your partner and predict divorce. You feel anxious and decide something must be seriously wrong with you. This thinking pattern feels protective. Your mind believes that if you imagine the worst, you'll be prepared for it. But catastrophizing doesn't prepare you. It paralyzes you. It floods your system with stress hormones based on events that haven't happened and probably won't. Flexible thinking practices, probabilistic assessment. Instead of jumping to the worst case, you ask, what's actually likely? What evidence supports this fear? What alternative outcomes exist? Usually, the most catastrophic scenario is the least probable, and seeing that creates space to breathe. Let's talk about perspective taking, the ability to see a situation from multiple viewpoints. This is one of the most powerful tools for building resilience because it breaks you out of your singular interpretation. When something hurtful happens, your immediate perspective is personal. They rejected me. They don't value me. This is about my inadequacy. But flexible thinking asks, what else could be true? Maybe they're dealing with their own pain. Maybe this has nothing to do with me. Maybe their capacity is limited right now. Maybe this is about compatibility, not worth. You're not denying your hurt. You're expanding your understanding. An expanded understanding reduces suffering because you stop making everything about a flaw in yourself. Here's a practice for building cognitive flexibility. Take any difficult situation you're facing right now. Write down your automatic interpretation, the story your mind tells you about what it means. Then force yourself to generate 5 alternative interpretations, not 5 positive spins. 5 genuinely possible alternative explanations. At first, this feels forced. Your mind wants to stick with its original story, but push through. Come up with 5. What you'll notice is that your certainty begins to crack. You realize your interpretation is not the only truth. It's one possible truth among many, and that creates freedom. Another practice is mental time travel. When you're stuck in current difficulty, project forward. How will I feel about this in 1 month? In 6 months? In 5 years? This question creates perspective. Most things that feel enormous today will barely register in the future. Knowing that doesn't make the pain disappear, but it prevents you from mistaking temporary pain for permanent damage. You can also travel backward. Think of something that devastated you 5 years ago. How do you feel about it now? Chances are it's either resolved, irrelevant, or integrated into your growth story. That past perspective reminds you that you've survived before. You've adapted before. You'll do it again. Cognitive flexibility also means being willing to update your beliefs when new information emerges. Rigid people cling to beliefs even when evidence contradicts them. This is called confirmation bias. You only notice information that supports what you already think. Flexible people practice intellectual humility. They hold beliefs loosely enough to revise them. They can say, I used to think this, but now I understand it differently. They can admit when they're wrong without it threatening their identity. This is not weakness. This is adaptability. The people who survive changing circumstances are not the strongest. They're the most flexible. Consider Rachel, who spent 10 years building a career in journalism. Then the industry collapsed. Her rigid response would be, my career is over. Everything I worked for is gone. I'm too old to start over. But cognitive flexibility allows a different response. The skills I built are transferable. This change forces me to explore what I actually want, not just what I trained for. Maybe this is redirection, not rejection. Rachel starts freelancing, discovers she loves documentary work, and builds something more aligned with her values than her original path ever was. Same event, different thinking, different outcome. Here's the neuroscience. Cognitive flexibility lives in your prefrontal cortex, particularly an area called the anterior cingulate cortex. This region activates when you need to, shifts strategies, when you detect conflict between expectation and reality, when you adapt to new rules. And like any brain region, it strengthens with use. Every time you practice seeing multiple perspectives, you're literally building neural pathways for flexibility. Every time you challenge an automatic thought, you're weakening rigid patterns. Every time you update a belief based on new evidence, you're training adaptability. The brain you have tomorrow depends on the thoughts you practice today. But here's the balance. Cognitive flexibility is not the same as having no convictions. You can be flexible in thinking while firm in values. You can adapt strategies while staying true to principles. You can change your mind about methods while remaining committed to meaning. Flexibility without values becomes aimlessness, but values without flexibility become fundamentalism. The goal is adaptive integrity, knowing what's non-negotiable and staying open about everything else. Master cognitive flexibility, and you become psychologically anti-fragile. Change doesn't break you. It refines you. Uncertainty doesn't paralyze you. It intrigues you. Difficulty doesn't defeat you. It educates you, because you're no longer attached to one way of seeing, one way of being, one way of succeeding. You trust yourself to adapt to whatever comes, and that trust is the foundation of unshakable resilience. Chapter 9. Relational Resilience. You cannot build lasting resilience in isolation. Humans are not solitary creatures. Our nervous systems are designed to regulate through connection. Our identities form through relationship. Our strength grows through belonging. This is relational resilience, the understanding that who you become is shaped by who you're with. And who you're with during difficulty determines whether you grow or stay broken. Let's start with a hard truth. Some relationships build resilience, others destroy it, and many people stay in resilience-destroying relationships because they confuse loyalty with self-betrayal. Not all connection is healthy. Not all support is supportive. Some relationships demand that you shrink to make others comfortable. Some require you to perform strength when you need to be honest. Some punish vulnerability and reward pretending. These relationships don't build resilience. They erode it, because resilience requires safety. And safety requires people who can hold space for your full humanity, your strength and your struggle, your competence and your confusion, your progress and your pain. Relational resilience begins with discernment. You must learn to distinguish between people who are safe and people who are familiar. Familiar feels comfortable because it matches your history, but familiar is not always healthy. Sometimes familiar is just the repetition of old wounds. Safe feels different. Safe is someone who doesn't need you to be perfect, who can sit with your emotions without rushing to fix them, who respects your boundaries, who takes responsibility for their impact, who can repair when they hurt you. Safe people don't demand that you prove your worth. They recognize it inherently. There's a concept in psychology called co-regulation. This is when one person's calm nervous system helps regulate another's distressed one. Think of a baby crying who calms when held by a parent. That's co-regulation. But adults need it too. When you're overwhelmed and someone sits with you without judgment, your nervous system begins to settle. Their presence, their tone, their regulated state signals to your body that you're safe. This is not dependence. This is how humans are designed to heal. In relationship. But co-regulation only works when the other person is genuinely regulated themselves. If they're anxious, if they're reactive, if they're projecting their fears onto your situation, they can't help you settle. They amplify the distress. This is why choosing your inner circle matters so much. You need people who have done their own work, who can be present without agenda, who can witness pain without trying to eliminate it immediately. These people are rare, but they're essential. Now let's talk about vulnerability. There's a misconception that vulnerability means telling everyone everything, that openness is always noble, that sharing is always healing. But vulnerability without discernment is not courage. It's self-harm. True vulnerability is selective. You share your tender parts with people who've earned the right to hear them, who've proven they can handle them with care. You don't open your wounds to people who keep throwing salt in them. That's not authenticity. That's poor boundaries. Relational resilience means knowing who gets access to which parts of you. Some people get your humor. Some get your ideas. Some get your struggles. Very few get your deepest fears and wounds. And that's appropriate. Not everyone has the capacity to hold what's most sacred in you. And offering it to people who can't is like handing a child a priceless artifact. The problem is not the artifact. It's the mismatch of capacity. Here's how to assess relational safety. Ask yourself these questions. Does this person celebrate my growth or feel threatened by it? Do they respect my no or pressure me past my boundaries? Can they admit when they're wrong and make genuine repair? Do they take responsibility for their emotions or make me responsible for managing them? Do I feel more myself around them or less? After time with them, do I feel energized or depleted? These questions reveal whether someone is adding to your resilience or draining it, and the answers should inform how much access you give them. Another dimension of relational resilience is knowing when to reach out and when to turn inward. Some people habitually seek external validation when what they need is internal clarity. They call everyone they know when they're upset, looking for someone to tell them what to feel or what to do. This creates dependency. It trains you to distrust your own judgment. Relational resilience means balancing connection with self-reliance. Sometimes you need to process alone before you share. Sometimes you need to sit with discomfort before seeking comfort. Sometimes the answer is inside you, not in someone else's advice. The practice is this. When distress arises, pause. Ask, do I need connection right now, or do I need presence with myself? Both are valid, but discerning which one serves you in this moment prevents you from outsourcing your emotional regulation entirely. Let's talk about conflict, because resilient relationships are not conflict-free. They're conflict-capable. Conflict is inevitable when two people with different histories, needs, and perspectives come together. The question is not whether you fight, it's how you fight. Resilient relationships have what's called secure attachment patterns. Both people can express needs without fear of abandonment. Both can disagree without the relationship feeling threatened. Both can repair after hurt. Insecure patterns look different. One person shuts down. One pursues aggressively. One threatens to leave. One clings desperately. The content of the fight matters less than the pattern. And the pattern is what determines whether conflict strengthens the relationship or erodes it. Building conflict-capable relationships requires several things. First, Both people must be willing to own their part, not to take all the blame, but to acknowledge their contribution, even if it's 10%. Second, both must prioritize repair over being right. Winning an argument but damaging the relationship is not winning. Third, both must be able to return to calm. If every disagreement escalates into rage or silent treatment, the relationship cannot sustain. You need the capacity to fight and then reconnect. If you can't do this, the relationship becomes a threat. And when relationship feels like threat, resilience disappears. Here's a truth about relational resilience that's often ignored. Sometimes the most resilient choice is leaving. Walking away from relationships that harm you is not failure, it's wisdom. Loyalty to your own well-being is not selfish, it's necessary. Some people will tell you that leaving proves you're not resilient enough, that if you were stronger, you'd endure. But this confuses resilience with tolerance for abuse, and they are not the same. Resilience knows when to stay and work through difficulty, and it knows when to leave because the difficulty is the relationship itself. This discernment protects you. It prevents you from spending years trying to fix what was never yours to fix. Finally, relational resilience includes the relationship you have with yourself. This is the foundation. If you can't be kind to yourself, if you can't forgive yourself, if you can't trust yourself, no external relationship will fill that void. Self-relationship is where you practice the skills you'll need in all other relationships: setting boundaries, honoring needs, offering compassion, telling the truth. When you can do this for yourself, you stop expecting others to do it for you. You stop making your peace dependent on someone else's approval. You stop tolerating mistreatment because you know your worth doesn't require consensus. Relational resilience is not about needing people less. It's about choosing people wisely. It's about building connections that nourish rather than deplete. It's about knowing that strength is not isolation. Strength is interdependence with people who've earned your trust. When you get this right, relationships become the container for your growth, not the cause of your suffering. And that changes everything. Chapter 10. The Neuroscience of Hope. Hope is not naivety. It's not blind optimism or denial of reality. Hope is a cognitive strategy, a way your brain assesses the future that either opens possibility or closes it. And neuroscience shows us something remarkable. Hope is not a feeling you wait for. It's a skill you practice. Let's start with what hope actually is in the brain. Hope involves 3 interconnected processes: goal setting, pathway thinking, and agency thinking. Goal setting is the ability to imagine a desired future. Not vague wishfulness, but specific vision. Pathway thinking is the ability to generate routes to that future, to see multiple ways forward, even when obstacles appear. Agency thinking is the belief that you have the capacity to pursue those paths, that your actions matter, that you're not helpless. When all 3 are active, your brain experiences hope. And hope activates specific neural networks that enhance motivation, persistence, and creative problem solving. Without hope, these networks go dormant. You stop looking for solutions. You stop trying new approaches. You accept defeat as inevitable. This is learned helplessness, and it's the opposite of resilience. Here's why this matters. Your brain is a prediction machine. It's constantly forecasting what's likely to happen next based on past experience. If your past is full of failure, betrayal, and disappointment, your brain predicts more of the same. It's not being pessimistic. It's being consistent with available data. But this creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you expect failure, you stop taking actions that might lead to success. You don't apply for the opportunity because you assume rejection. You don't reach out because you expect to be ignored. You don't try because you're certain it won't work. And by not trying, you guarantee the outcome you feared. Hope interrupts this cycle. It doesn't deny past pain. It refuses to let past pain dictate future possibility. It says, that happened then. This is now. And now might be different. This is not delusion. This is choice. Choosing to remain open to outcomes you haven't experienced yet. Research by psychologist Charles Snyder shows that high hope individuals outperform low hope individuals even when controlling for intelligence, talent, and previous achievement. Why? Because hope drives behavior. Hopeful people set clearer goals. They generate more pathways when the first one fails. They persist longer through difficulty. And they interpret setbacks as temporary rather than permanent. These behaviors compound. Over time, hopeful people create more opportunities, build more skills, and achieve more success. Not because they're lucky. Because hope directs their attention and action toward possibility. Now let's talk about realistic hope versus toxic positivity. Toxic positivity denies reality. It insists everything is fine when it's not. It invalidates pain with platitudes. It demands happiness regardless of circumstances. This is not hope. This is suppression. Realistic hope acknowledges pain and still looks for pathways forward. It says, this is hard, and I'm struggling, and I still believe something can shift. It holds both grief and possibility, suffering and meaning, pain and purpose. This is the kind of hope that builds resilience, because it doesn't require you to lie to yourself about reality. It requires you to stay open about what reality might become. There's a neurochemical component too. Hope activates dopamine pathways associated with motivation and reward anticipation. When you imagine a positive future, your brain releases dopamine. This feels good, and it drives you to take action toward that future. But here's the trap. If you imagine a positive future and take no action, you get a dopamine hit without any real progress. This is fantasy, not hope. True hope requires action, even small action, even imperfect action, because action creates feedback, and feedback creates learning, and learning creates competence, and competence creates more hope. It's a virtuous cycle. Let's apply this practically. Imagine someone, Jonathan, who's been unemployed for 6 months. His default prediction is, I'll never find work. I'm too old. The market is terrible. I'm not qualified enough. This prediction makes him stop trying. He applies half-heartedly. He gives up easily. He interprets every rejection as confirmation. Hopelessness becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now imagine Jonathan practices hope. He sets a clear goal. I will find meaningful work that uses my skills. He generates pathways. I can network. I can learn new skills. I can apply to different industries. I can reach out to former colleagues. I can freelance while I search. He believes in his agency. I have skills. I've succeeded before. I can handle rejection without it defining me. Each rejection becomes data, not identity. With this mindset, Jonathan takes more action. He learns from what doesn't work. He adjusts his approach. And eventually, he finds something. Not because hope magically created opportunity, because hope drove the behavior that created opportunity. Here's how to cultivate hope neurologically. First, practice specific goal articulation. Vague hopes, like "I want to be happy," don't activate the brain's planning systems. Specific goals, like "I want to build a career in environmental advocacy," do. Write down what you actually want, not what you think you should want, what you genuinely desire. Second, engage in pathway generation. For every goal, force yourself to list at least 3 different routes to achievement. This trains your brain to see multiple possibilities instead of fixating on one way. When that way closes, you don't collapse, you pivot. Third, collect evidence of past agency. Write down times you've overcome difficulty, times you've learned something hard, times you've achieved what once seemed impossible. Your brain needs reminders that you're capable. Memory is selective. Depression and anxiety highlight failures. Hope practice highlights competence. Fourth, take small action immediately. Hope without action is fantasy. Action without hope is drudgery. But hope with action is momentum. Do one small thing today that moves you toward what you want. The size doesn't matter. The direction does. Fifth, surround yourself with hopeful people. Not people who deny reality. People who face reality and still believe in possibility. Hope is contagious through mirror neurons. When you spend time with people who practice hope, your brain begins to mirror their patterns. There's also something called hope theory's dark side. Some people use hope as avoidance. They hope things will magically improve without changing anything. They hope someone will rescue them. They hope problems will disappear on their own. This is not hope. This is passivity disguised as optimism. True hope is active. It acknowledges what you cannot control and focuses on what you can. It doesn't wait for life to change. It asks, "What can I change?" And then it acts. Here's the neurological bottom line. Your brain will believe what you repeatedly show it. If you repeatedly show it evidence of helplessness, it will predict helplessness. If you repeatedly show it evidence of agency, it will predict possibility. Hope is not something you feel. It's something you practice. And the more you practice it, the more your brain rewires toward resilience. Because resilience is not the absence of despair. It's the presence of hope despite despair. It's the stubborn refusal to let the past dictate the future. It's the choice to keep looking for pathways even when the first 100 close. That's what separates people who bounce back from people who stay broken. Not luck, not privilege. Hope practiced until it becomes belief. And belief enacted until it becomes reality. Chapter 11. Post-traumatic growth. There's a phenomenon that psychology has only recently begun to understand. Some people don't just survive trauma. They grow because of it. Not despite the pain, but through it. They emerge from suffering with greater wisdom, deeper compassion, clearer priorities, and stronger character than they had before. This is post-traumatic growth, and it reveals something profound about human resilience. We are not fragile. We are anti-fragile. Under the right conditions, adversity doesn't just fail to break us. It makes us stronger. But here's the critical distinction. Post-traumatic growth is not automatic. Suffering alone doesn't produce wisdom. If it did, everyone who suffered would be wise. And clearly, that's not true. Some people are shattered by trauma and never recover. Some survive, but remain stuck in bitterness. Some heal, but simply return to baseline. Post-traumatic growth requires something more. It requires conscious engagement with the pain. It requires making meaning from what happened. It requires allowing the trauma to challenge your assumptions and rebuild your worldview. Psychologists Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun identified 5 domains where growth occurs after trauma. Let's examine each. First, personal strength. People who grow through trauma discover capacities they didn't know they had. They survive what they thought would destroy them, and in surviving, they learn something unshakable. I am stronger than I believed. This is not arrogance. It's earned confidence. It's the knowledge that comes from walking through fire and emerging on the other side. Think of someone, Elena, who loses her home in a natural disaster. Everything she owned, gone. In the immediate aftermath, she feels devastated, helpless, overwhelmed. But as she begins to rebuild, she discovers resilience she never knew existed. She navigates bureaucracy. She asks for help. She makes decisions under pressure. She keeps going when everything in her wants to quit. A year later, when she faces a different crisis, she doesn't crumble. She thinks, I survived losing everything. I can handle this. That's personal strength born from trauma. Second, deeper relationships. Trauma has a way of clarifying who matters. When you're at your lowest, you see who shows up, who stays, who offers genuine support versus performative concern. People who grow through trauma often report that their relationships become fewer but deeper. They stop wasting energy on superficial connections. They invest in people who prove their worth during difficulty. They also become more vulnerable. Having been broken, they're less afraid of showing cracks. And vulnerability creates intimacy in a way that perfect facades never can. Third, greater appreciation for life. This is perhaps the most common form of post-traumatic growth. When you face mortality, loss, or the fragility of existence, ordinary moments gain extraordinary meaning. The taste of coffee, the sound of laughter, the warmth of sunlight. Things you once took for granted become precious. People who've survived serious illness often talk about this. They say, I don't sweat small stuff anymore. I'm more present. I'm more grateful. Not because they're trying to be positive, because they viscerally understand that life is temporary, and temporary things deserve attention. Fourth, new possibilities. Sometimes trauma closes one door so forcefully that you're forced to find another, and that other door leads somewhere you never would have discovered otherwise. A career ends, and you find work that's more aligned. A relationship ends, and you discover parts of yourself that were suppressed. A plan fails, and you stumble into something better. This doesn't mean the trauma was good. It means you refused to let the trauma be the end of your story. You used it as a catalyst for exploration. Consider Marcus, who becomes paralyzed in an accident. His athletic career, his identity, his entire life plan, gone. For months, he's submerged in grief and rage. But slowly, he begins to explore adaptive sports, then advocacy, then public speaking about disability rights. He discovers purpose he never imagined. He impacts lives in ways his previous path never would have. He doesn't diminish the loss, but he builds meaning alongside it. Fifth, spiritual or philosophical growth. Trauma forces you to confront big questions. Why do bad things happen? What matters most? What do I believe about the nature of existence? For some, this leads to deepened faith. For others, it leads to entirely new frameworks. The specific belief system matters less than the depth of engagement. People who grow through trauma stop living on autopilot. They become philosophers of their own lives. They examine assumptions. They clarify values. They decide consciously what they stand for. This creates a solidity that easy lives rarely produce. Now let's address what prevents post-traumatic growth, because not everyone experiences it, and understanding the barriers helps you navigate toward growth. The first barrier is avoidance. If you refuse to engage with what happened, if you suppress the emotion and distract from the pain, you can't process it. An unprocessed trauma doesn't teach, it just haunts. Growth requires turning toward the wound, not running from it. The second barrier is getting stuck in victim identity. This is when the trauma becomes your primary identity. You introduce yourself through your wound. Every conversation circles back to what happened. You've confused acknowledging pain with being defined by it. Victim identity is understandable. It makes sense of suffering. It explains why life is hard. But it also keeps you powerless. Because if you are your trauma, healing becomes a threat to your sense of self. The third barrier is lack of support. Post-traumatic growth is more likely when you have people who can witness your pain without trying to fix it, who can hold space for your processing, who can reflect back your strength when you can't see it yourself. Isolation makes growth much harder. The fourth barrier is rigid thinking. If you need the world to make sense, if you need justice to be reliable, if you need fairness to be guaranteed, trauma will shatter you. Because the world often doesn't make sense. Injustice happens. Fairness fails. Growth requires accepting reality as it is, not as it should be. And then asking, given this reality, how do I want to live? Here's how to move toward post-traumatic growth intentionally. First, allow grief. You cannot grow around pain you won't acknowledge. Sit with the loss. Cry. Rage. Mourn what was taken from you. This is not wallowing. This is honoring reality. Second, find narrative. Tell the story of what happened. Write it. Speak it. Shape it into coherent form. Narrative gives you control over chaos. It transforms, "This happened to me," into, "This is what happened, and here's what I'm making of it." Third, extract meaning. Ask yourself, what did this teach me? What matters more now? What matters less? What strengths did I discover? How am I different? Meaning doesn't justify the trauma. It redeems your response to it. Fourth, connect with others who've grown through pain. Not people stuck in suffering. People who've moved through it. Their existence proves it's possible. Their stories light the path. Fifth, contribute. Use what you learned to help others. This doesn't mean rushing to teach before you've healed. But eventually, sharing your growth creates purpose from pain. It transforms suffering into service. There's a quote often attributed to Ernest Hemingway. "The world breaks everyone, and afterward, many are strong at the broken places." This is post-traumatic growth. The fractures don't disappear, but they're where the light gets in. They're where compassion deepens. They're where strength forges. You are not the same person you were before trauma. That person is gone, and grieving that loss is valid. But you get to decide who you become after. You can become bitter. You can become broken. Or you can become both wounded and wise. Both scarred and strong. Both changed in choosing. That's the promise of post-traumatic growth. Not that suffering is good, but that you are capable of transforming it into something meaningful. And that capability is the deepest form of resilience. Chapter 12. The Integration Plan. Understanding resilience is not enough. Knowledge without application remains theory. And theory, no matter how beautiful, doesn't change your life. Integration does. This chapter, is your roadmap for taking everything you've learned and weaving it into the fabric of your daily existence. Integration is not about perfection. It's about practice. It's not about doing everything at once. It's about starting somewhere and building consistency. Because resilience is not an achievement, it's a practice, a way of moving through the world that you strengthen every single day. Let's break this into a practical 30-day framework. Not because 30 days makes you a master, but because 30 days builds momentum, and momentum creates lasting change. Week 1. Foundation and awareness. The first week is about establishing baseline awareness. You cannot change patterns you don't see. Day 1 through 3. Morning practice. Each morning, before reaching for your phone, take 5 minutes to check in with yourself. Notice your physical state. How did you sleep? What's the quality of your energy? Notice your emotional state. What's present? Anxiety, calm, anticipation, dread. Notice your mental state. Is your mind clear or cluttered? Agitated or settled? Just observe. No judgment, no fixing. This builds interoceptive awareness, your ability to read your internal state. And that awareness is the foundation of regulation. Day 4 through 7. Evening reflection. Each evening, spend 10 minutes reviewing your day. What challenged me today? How did I respond? What would I do differently? What am I grateful for? Write brief answers. You're training your brain to extract learning from daily experience. You're also training gratitude, which research shows significantly increases resilience. Week 2. Regulation skills. This week focuses on building your nervous system regulation toolkit. Day 8 through 10. Breathing practice. 3 times daily, practice box breathing. Inhale 4 counts. Hold 4 counts. Exhale 4 counts. Hold 4 counts. Repeat 4 cycles. Do this when you're calm so the pattern becomes familiar. Then when stress hits, your body knows the way back to regulation. Day 11 through 14. Body-based regulation. Introduce 1 physical practice daily. Cold exposure, even 30 seconds of cold water at the end of your shower. Progressive muscle relaxation before bed. A 20-minute walk in nature. Movement that discharges stress. You're teaching your body that it has pathways to calm that don't require thinking. Week 3. Cognitive reframing. This week is about training mental flexibility. Day 15 through 17. Thought logging. Each time you notice a negative automatic thought, write it down. Then generate 3 alternative interpretations. You're not trying to be positive. You're trying to be accurate, to see that your first thought is not necessarily true, just automatic. Day 18 through 21. Perspective practice. When something frustrating happens, practice timeline perspective. How will I feel about this in 1 week? 1 month? 1 year? Then practice relational perspective. How might the other person see this situation? You're widening your lens, training your brain to zoom out. Week 4. Relational and meaning work. The final week integrates connection and purpose. Day 22 through 24. Connection practice. Reach out to 1 person daily. Not superficial contact. Genuine connection. A meaningful conversation. A vulnerable share. An expression of appreciation. You're strengthening the relational container that holds you during difficulty. Day 25 through 27. Values clarification. Write down your core values. Not what you think they should be, what they actually are. Then review your daily life. Where do your actions align with your values? Where do they contradict? Make one small adjustment toward alignment. Day 28 through 30. Meaning-making practice. Reflect on a current or recent difficulty. Write about it using this framework. What happened factually? What did I feel? What did I learn about myself? What strength did I discover? How might this serve my growth? You're practicing the skill of extracting meaning from pain. This is post-traumatic growth in real time, beyond 30 days. Sustainable practice. After 30 days, the goal is not to maintain every practice. That's unsustainable. The goal is to identify which practices serve you most and build those into permanent rituals. Choose one practice from each category. One for awareness, maybe morning check-ins. One for regulation, maybe daily walks. One for cognition, maybe thought logging when stressed. One for connection, maybe weekly meaningful conversations. One for meaning, maybe monthly reflections on growth. These 5 practices, done consistently, create a resilience infrastructure. They become non-negotiable parts of your life, like brushing your teeth. Not because they're obligations, because they're investments in your capacity to handle whatever comes. Here's what to expect during integration. The first week will feel effortful. You'll forget practices. You'll resist. Your mind will say, "This is pointless." Keep going anyway. Not because it feels good, because consistency creates results that motivation alone never will. The second week, things start to feel slightly more natural. You'll notice small shifts. A moment where you paused instead of reacting. A thought you reframed successfully. A conversation that felt more connected. These are not accidents. They're evidence that practice works. The third week, you'll hit resistance again. This is normal. Change threatens your brain's preference for predictability. You'll be tempted to quit. Don't. This is where most people stop, right before the breakthrough. The fourth week, if you've stayed consistent, something shifts. The practices start to integrate. They're not things you do. They're becoming who you are. You're not trying to be resilient. You're practicing resilience until it becomes your default. A few critical reminders for integration. First, imperfection is expected. You will miss days. You will react when you meant to respond. You will forget everything you've learned in moments of high stress. This doesn't mean failure. It means you're human. Resilience is not perfection. It's returning to practice after you drift. Second, context matters. These practices work best in conjunction with basics: sleep, nutrition, movement, reduced chronic stress. You cannot breathe your way out of sleep deprivation. You cannot reframe your way out of malnutrition. Handle the fundamentals. Third, get support. Share your integration plan with someone you trust. Ask them to check in on your progress. Consider therapy if you're working through significant trauma. Consider coaching if you want accountability. You don't have to do this alone. Fourth, measure progress accurately. Don't compare yourself to who you think you should be. Compare yourself to who you were 30 days ago, 60 days ago, a year ago. That's your real progress. Finally, trust the process. There will be days when resilience feels impossible, when you're overwhelmed despite all your tools, when pain breaks through every practice. These days don't erase your progress. They're part of the human experience. The goal is not to never struggle. The goal is to struggle skillfully, to move through pain without getting stuck in it, to feel everything without being destroyed by anything. That's resilience. And it's built one practice at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of awareness at a time. You're not trying to become someone else. You're becoming more fully yourself, strong and soft, resilient and sensitive, capable of holding it all. Integration is how theory becomes life, how understanding becomes embodiment, how knowledge becomes wisdom. This is your path. Walk it with patience, with consistency, with compassion for yourself, and watch as resilience stops being something you're trying to achieve and becomes something you simply are. Chapter 13. Living as the strong, tender one. There is a way of being in the world that most people never find. It is the place where strength and tenderness meet, where you are powerful without being hard, vulnerable without being fragile, sensitive without being overwhelmed. This is the integrated self, the person who has done the work, felt the pain, learned the lessons, and emerged both wounded and whole. Living as the strong, tender one means you no longer see strength and sensitivity as opposites. You understand they are partners. Sensitivity gives you information. Strength gives you capacity to act on that information. Sensitivity lets you feel the depth of life. Strength lets you hold that depth without drowning. Most people split these qualities. They choose one and exile the other. Some choose strength and lose access to their hearts. They become effective but empty, competent but disconnected. They handle everything externally while dying internally. Others choose tenderness and lose their backbone. They feel everything but can't protect themselves. They're open but constantly wounded, available but constantly depleted. The integrated path refuses the split. It says you can be both. You must be both. Because strength without tenderness becomes cruelty, and tenderness without strength becomes martyrdom. Neither serves you. Neither serves the world. So what does this integration look like in practice? It looks like setting boundaries with kindness, not apologizing for your limits, but not weaponizing them either. It's saying no with clarity and compassion. It's protecting your energy while respecting others' dignity. It looks like feeling your emotions fully without making them other people's responsibility. You cry when you need to cry. You rage when you need to rage. But you don't use your emotions to manipulate or control. You own them. You process them. You let them inform you without letting them define you. It looks like being honest even when honesty is uncomfortable. Not brutal honesty that's just cruelty without accountability, but clear honesty that honors both truth and relationship. It's telling someone they hurt you while still seeing their humanity. It's admitting your mistakes without collapsing into shame. It looks like staying present with others' pain without trying to fix it. Your partner cries, and you hold space instead of offering solutions. Your friend struggles, and you listen instead of advising. You trust that sometimes presence is the answer, that bearing witness is healing. It looks like asking for help without apologizing for needing it. You recognize that interdependence is not weakness, that we are designed to need each other, that receiving support is not failure. It's wisdom. It looks like celebrating others' success without comparing it to your own journey. You're secure enough in your path that someone else's achievement doesn't threaten you. You can be genuinely happy for them while still working on your own goals. It looks like forgiving without forgetting. You release the anger that's poisoning you, but you remember the lesson. You don't keep letting people hurt you in the name of compassion. You have mercy and boundaries simultaneously. It looks like pursuing your dreams with determination while holding them lightly. You work hard. You stay committed. but you're not attached to one specific outcome. You trust that effort matters even when results disappoint. It looks like being confident without being arrogant. You know your worth. You recognize your strengths, but you also know your limitations. You're secure enough to admit what you don't know, strong enough to ask for guidance. The strong, tender one moves through the world differently. They're not rushed because they're not trying to prove anything. They're not defensive because they're not protecting a false image. They're not closed because they're not afraid of being hurt. They know hurt is part of living fully. And they've learned that being hurt doesn't mean being broken. People notice this quality. They're drawn to it because the strong, tender one creates safety. Others can be themselves around you. They don't have to perform strength. They don't have to hide struggle. They can be human. And in a world that demands constant performance, permission to be human is a gift. But living this way is not easy. The world will misinterpret you. When you're strong, some will call you cold. When you're tender, some will call you weak. You'll confuse people who've never seen strength and sensitivity integrated. They'll try to put you in a box. Don't go. Stay in the paradox. Stay in the both and. Because the tension between strength and tenderness is not a problem to solve. It's a dynamic to embody. Some days will require more strength. You'll need to stand firm, to hold your ground, to fight for what matters. Other days will require more tenderness. You'll need to soften, to receive, to allow vulnerability. The skill is knowing which the moment requires and having access to both. This is emotional intelligence. This is spiritual maturity. This is resilience fully realized. You're no longer at war with yourself. The parts of you that feel and the parts of you that act are aligned. You're integrated. And from that integration, you become a force. Not a force that dominates. A force that uplifts. Not a force that controls. A force that creates space. Not a force that demands. A force that inspires. The strong, tender one doesn't need to announce their strength. It's evident in their calm, in their presence, in how they show up when others fall apart. And they don't need to perform vulnerability. It's natural, appropriate, real. This is who you can become. Not by choosing strength over sensitivity or sensitivity over strength. By refusing the false choice altogether. By integrating what was always meant to be integrated. By honoring your full humanity. The world needs more people like this. People who can hold complexity, who can be fierce and gentle, who can lead with power and serve with humility, who can feel everything and still show up with clarity. That can be you. Not someday, starting now, with every choice to stay open when you want to close, with every choice to stay grounded when you want to collapse, with every choice to honor both your strength and your sensitivity as sacred. This is the path. Walk it with courage. Walk it with grace. Walk it knowing you don't have to be one or the other. You can be both. And both is where true resilience lives. Closing reflection, the invitation forward. If you've stayed with me through this journey, you've learned something most people spend their entire lives avoiding. That resilience is not about becoming harder. It's about becoming wiser. That sensitivity is not your weakness. It's your radar. That pain, when met consciously, becomes the teacher you never knew you needed. You've learned the neuroscience of how your brain builds strength, the psychology of how meaning transforms suffering, the practice of how small daily choices compound into unshakable character. But knowledge alone changes nothing. The question now is not what do you know? The question is, what will you do with what you know? Because everything in this audiobook is an invitation to stop running from your emotions and start understanding them, an invitation to stop mistaking numbness for strength and start building real capacity, an invitation to stop waiting to be rescued and start becoming your own foundation. The world will keep testing you. Life will keep challenging you. Pain will keep finding you. That's not a flaw in your journey. That's the nature of being alive. But now you have tools. You understand that your amygdala is not your enemy. It's just outdated. You know that reframing is not denial. It's strategic meaning-making. You've learned that post-traumatic growth is possible when you engage with pain consciously. You know that resilience is built in the moments between crisis through sleep, regulation, connection, and meaning. You understand that cognitive flexibility opens doors that rigid thinking keeps closed. And you've seen that the integration of strength and sensitivity creates something rare and powerful. Now comes the practice. The daily choice to pause instead of react, to reframe instead of ruminate, to connect instead of isolate, to extract meaning instead of staying stuck in suffering. Some days, you'll do this well. You'll feel proud of your growth. Other days, you'll forget everything. You'll react. You'll collapse. You'll wonder if anything you learned actually matters. Both are part of the path. Progress is not linear. Resilience is not constant. What matters is that you keep returning. Keep practicing. Keep choosing awareness over autopilot. Because resilience is not a destination. It's a practice, and you're already practicing right now. By finishing this audiobook, you've shown you're willing to do the work. That's more than most people ever do. So honor that. Honor yourself for showing up, for staying curious, for wanting to grow instead of staying stuck. Remember this: you are not broken. You are breaking open. You are not too sensitive. You are courageously alive. You are not falling behind. You are exactly where you need to be to learn what you need to learn. The science of mental resilience is not about losing your sensitivity. It's about protecting it, honoring it, using it as the gift it was always meant to be. You don't need to become someone else. You need to become more fully yourself, strong and tender, resilient and sensitive, grounded and open. That version of you is not far away. It's here, right now, in every conscious choice, in every regulated breath, in every reframed thought, in every moment you choose wisdom over reactivity. You're building that person. One practice at a time. Keep going. The world needs people who feel deeply and think clearly, who have been broken and chose to rebuild, who understand suffering and chose compassion. That's you. That's who you're becoming. And becoming is enough. Thank you for trusting this journey. Thank you for your time, your attention, your willingness to grow. If this audiobook served you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because resilience is not just personal, it's collective. And when one person heals, it creates permission for others to heal too. Until we meet again, stay gentle with yourself. Stay committed to your practice. Stay open to possibility. You are stronger than you know, more capable than you believe, and more resilient than you've yet discovered. This is not the end. This is the beginning. Welcome to the rest of your life. Live it consciously. Live it courageously. Live it as the strong, tender, resilient person you truly are.